Hey everybody, welcome to Life is Brewtiful. I'm Anthony. Today we are going to be doing a segment of my channel called Legends of Beer. It is a segment where we talk about one person in particular who played some massively important role on the world of beer, whether it be a brewer or some type of mythical legend. Well, today we're going to be talking about an actual religious holy man, a patron saint of beer. We are going to be talking about the one, the only, the Belgian patron saint of Belgian beer and brewers. We're going to be talking about Saint Arnold of Soissons. Sorry if I mispronounced that badly. So I know that when it comes to brewing beer, I am certainly no expert. I like to think, I've got some skill. I produce some drinkable beer, but I've certainly made tons of mistakes. I have, wrong ingredients, missed boil times or temperatures or, any multitude of things, infections, whatever. And anytime I find myself in a situation where I might waste a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, I often wish there was just someone on high that I could speak to guide me through that misery, that trial and that tribulation. And apparently there was somebody there all along, and that is Saint Arnold of Soissons. And I really want to talk about him because he's an actually fascinating character. I'm not hugely religious myself, but I'm always fascinated in how beer intermingles itself into every aspect of life, to include religion, and specifically the Christian religion, where around the world in a lot of places, beer seems at odds with Christianity. But St. Arnold seems to have basically become a saint off of it. So he's incredibly fascinating to me. Now, I do need to make a little bit of a disclaimer here before we get too deep into it. And that is, there seems to be, depending on what record or source you go through, anywhere between 2 to 3 different Saint Arnolds. And what muddles this complication even further is the fact that they all seem to be the patron saint of beer or brewers. So it's a little bit confusing. And while I was going through my research, I would see the same story told over and over and over again under the different Arnolds. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So it just seems that they all have their own stories as themselves, but a lot of the other stories kind of get intermingled and mixed up by people who are less scrupulous in their research and mix things up. So I did my absolute best possible. I've spent a lot of time trying to parse out the different Arnolds and make sure that the Saint Arnold of Soissons is given the credit for the things that he actually did, and the others are given the credit that they did in a future video that I plan on doing on them. So with that all being said, I just want to specifically state that I tried my best, but who knows at this point, because some of these stories are literally thousands of years ago that at any point in time could have been misattributed or mixed up throughout the source materials. So I tried. Saint Arnold of Soissons was born outside of Brussels around the year 1040 AD. Throughout his youth and some of his adult life, Saint Arnold, who I guess was just Arnold at this point, was training to become a professional soldier. And as he got older and developed through his military career, he actually served under or actually led several different campaigns throughout Europe. But he grew very weary of the battles, the hardships of military life. It takes a lot of toll on you, especially back at that point where you were just so in each other's face with, sharpened steel. So, it wasn't like the wars today, which are still traumatic, but you're hitting, sometimes faceless people from incredible distances. This was gritty, up in each other's faces. So certainly hard for somebody who was so spiritually attuned to, the Christian religious preachings of, forgiveness and brotherhood and, kinship. So, growing weary of military hardships, he actually abandoned his military service and he went to become a monk, a hermit at the St. Menard's Abbey in France. He served as a hermit or a junior monk for about 3 years before being offered the position as the actual lead father, the lead brother of the entire abbey. According to legend, he actually turned down this offering. He didn't think that he was suitable or fit to be in a religious position of leadership. Some religious scholars actually attribute this to potential guilt stemming from his time in the military, in which certainly there were some type of gruesome acts or possible atrocities, that occurred during that time. So he felt that he was not suited to lead religious, Christian men in religious efforts. So he actually decided to pack up his things and leave. But while he was leaving, before he even got off the grounds of the abbey, a large wolf appeared out of nowhere and actually chased him back into the safety, the walls of the abbey. And he saw that as a sign of God, that he should actually indeed take up this position. He was literally chased by a wolf sent by God to become a saint. Pretty cool. Unfortunately, not everyone took the same type of religious approach to leadership that he did. There's a lot of inner politics amongst the Christian community back in that day, and it seemed that some other brothers within that brotherhood, within that abbey, were conspiring for his position in order to continue climbing that religious and at the same time political chain, because at that time there was a lot of power given to religious authorities, in positions of power. Growing tired of the political infighting, he actually decided to seclude himself. He left his position and decided to become a hermit, way out in the middle of nowhere. That way he could focus on his studies and, his relationship with God. According to legends, he decided to head back towards Belgium from France wearing nothing but burlap sacks, a former military leader, a former religious person of authority walking as a hermit in burlap sacks. I mean, that really shows the humility and the humbleness and his sacrifice of worldly power and possessions. It signifies a true dedication to his beliefs. He settled down at a recently established abbey known as St. Peter's Abbey of Oudenburg. And it was here at St. Peter in Oudenburg that he actually found his true divinely gifted method of providing godly and religious acts for his common people, his flock. And that was brewing beer. I find it funny, the connection that we often see amongst religious people, in the Arthur Guinness video. He too saw himself as providing beer as an act of religious charity. So I find it funny that is such a common thread amongst the more religious aspects of people in the Legends of Beer series. So during this point in time, beer was actually seen as a healthier alternative to water. Waterways were contaminated by sewage and, just natural contaminants, natural bacteria, molds, whatever. And if it was left unpasteurized, if it was left unfiltered, unclean, all things that people at this point in time honestly had no knowledge of or know how to do, it could possibly cause mass infections, a spread of disease, or even death. The act of boiling the water to make beer pasteurized it and got rid of a lot of those contaminants and diseases and illnesses, and it made beer so much better for you than water. And when we're talking about this point in time, there probably were some possibly hops, possibly other herbal additives that could provide additional antiseptic qualities to it. And then all three of those things combined with the actual alcohol production all created something that was relatively safe to drink. Arnold saw that the people of Oudenburg, the peasants, they didn't have access to clean water, downstream from major cities, plus their own contaminants being thrown into it, certainly were causing a lot of problems. So St. Arnold knew the method of brewing beer for sanitization, and he got that type of leadership from the act of just being within the religious confines of the different abbeys throughout time, where brewing beer was seen as a daily practice for such reasons. He decided that he wanted to be able to provide clean hydration to the people of Oldenburg. So he started up a little bit of a brewing program within the abbey, and he was giving it away or selling it for nominal fees to the local people of Oldenburg in order to help improve their quality of life. He would frequently hold sermons and preachings where he would try to convince people, stop drinking water, drink beer instead. I think his most famous quote of all time was, "From man's sweat and God's love, beer came into the world," which, powerful. There was a little bit of a backlash against him because of this. Some sources say that the people that he was actually preaching this method to, they actually thought that he was not trying to do something for the benefit of themselves. Instead, he was trying to make additional money for the abbey. And, there was a lot of distrust against the political and religious powers that be at that point in time, much kind of the same way we see it today. In order to kind of put their mind at ease, he reportedly took his crucifix chain that he wore around his neck, dipped it into the vat of beer to make, the alcoholic equivalent of holy water. It was sanctified. It was a holy beverage at that point. It was blessed, and that really encouraged people to pick it up, and it could not have happened at a better time. So it was this blessed beer that would eventually become Arnold's first miracle. Now, if you're not familiar with the process of canonization to become a saint, you have to perform at least 2 miracles, I think, with a varying amount of witnesses. I can't remember the whole process, but basically you had to do some, fantastical works of God. And his first miracle came after his blessing of the beer and serving it to the people. See, the thing was that St. Arnold, when he arrived at Oldenburg, they were actually in the middle of a plague. There was a intense bout of what is presumed to be cholera spreading throughout the community. And cholera is commonly spread through contaminated water and that type of mucus to mucus transfers. So when Arnold showed up and he started preaching, stop drinking water, drink beer, the number of cases of people affected by this plague drastically dwindled. There's actually stories about how years following that dissipation of what was assumed to be cholera, that another mass plague, another disease was sweeping through Belgium. And reportedly, I don't know how accurate this is, but reportedly the entire city of Oldenburg was completely untouched, which again makes me think possibly cholera, since if they're all drinking beer instead of the water, they're probably not going to catch it. So incredibly fascinating. And it was because of this, Arnold was seen as a savior to the people. He was, all the doubts that were previously placed on him were washed away, and he was seen as a miracle worker. He cured the plague. He knew the secret to solving their problems, and he became a hero. And Arnold kept preaching the message of beer and the importance of drinking it over water all the way up into his death, basically. But his second miracle was also beer related. There was apparently a massive windstorm that came through, destroyed much of the town, and actually destroyed huge sections of the abbey itself. Apparently, the giant heavy wooden beams that held up the roof of the abbey actually collapsed all the way down, busting through floors, if there were floors, all the way down into the cellar, and actually destroyed much of the beer reserves that were being brewed and held down there. According to some sources, the majority of all the beer down there was destroyed, save for 1 or 2 barrels. For a monk who had, built up his entire position of authority off of preaching the message of beer, this was absolutely devastating to probably his order as well as the entire community. Fearing that they would be without the holy drink, a lot of the villagers and the peasants, they started to panic. They started to freak out. But St. Arnold was there to put their mind at ease. He began to pray. He began to pray that the abbey's beer reserves, what survived, would hold out and be able to provide drink to every single person in the town throughout their daily consumption, and it would hold them over until the brewery was able to be reconstructed and more beer was to be produced. And it seems that St. Arnold's prayers actually worked. Go figure. According to the records, it seemed that all the villagers of Oldenburg, they drank heartily every single day. And no matter what, their supply of beer never ran out, despite the fact that there was probably only enough barrels for, possibly a couple of days at most. But the barrels just never seemed to run dry. Regardless, this was seen as a true miracle, reminiscent of the more Catholicized, accepted story where Jesus had the unlimited loaves of bread and the fish and everything that he fed to everybody. And this was genuinely seen as a miracle for his congregation as well as the greater Christian population of Europe. It was a true sign from God that Arnold was divine. And that had culminated into the fact that several years after Arnold had passed away, the Catholic Church, at the behest of his rather dedicated following of parishioners and beer drinkers, they really wanted him canonized. So the Catholic Church started doing their research and their investigation into Arnold and his works, and they determined that he did indeed, through the power of God, conduct miracles and protect the Christian faith and population through his works. And they canonized him, making him a saint. And the Belgian people, they adopted him as their own, making him their patron saint of brewers and of just beer in general from Belgium. So he really became instantly intertwined, kind of as he lived, with the legends and the history of beer. Now throughout Belgium and actually the Netherlands as well, and parts of France, you can find statues of St. Arnold. He's usually depicted either holding a glass of beer or possibly like a rake, a mash rake or a mash fork, something to do with beer. I've even seen like images of him with hops and everything like that. So he's completely intertwined now as a part of beer culture. Unfortunately, St. Arnold's Monastery in Oldenburg was destroyed by Napoleon's forces during the French Revolution, where there was a lot of anti-clericalism, and they went through and they destroyed actually a whole bunch of Christian artifacts and things of that nature. And you can still visit it to this day, but it's mostly ruins. It's like basically one dilapidated tower, essentially. But his legacy does live on. The brewery that took over the brewing responsibilities of his monastery still produces a beer that has his image depicted on it still to this day. But for those in America, you could probably still be familiar with St. Arnold, because St. Arnold Brewery, the famous one down in Texas that makes Pumpkinator, aka the greatest pumpkin beer ever to be brewed, they are essentially named after St. Arnold of Soissons. So, I mean, his legacy lives on still to this day. In fact, if you want to celebrate the works or the legacy of St. Arnold, there is a bit of a festivity where you have celebrations. I think it's called Belgian Beer Week, but during that there are proceedings in the actual Catholic Church, the main one in Belgium, where they actually celebrate St. Arnold, and all the major breweries throughout the region, they all kind of get together. They're known as the Knights of the Mashing Fork, and they hold celebrations and festivities mostly in honor of St. Arnold. It's really cool. And I really want to talk about them more, but that's for another day. Stay tuned. So in conclusion, St. Arnold was an absolutely fascinating character. You know, he, even for somebody who's not religious like me, he just kind of stands out, you know, regardless of what his intentions were, or whether they be religious or whatever. It's still fascinating to me because he used beer as a method of improving people's lives. You know, there's not a whole lot of people out there who can say that, beer makes a lot of people happy, but very little is it definitive proof or evidence that it actually greatly benefited somebody's life other than anecdotally. And even though St. Arnold is only one of 3 other St. Arnolds and probably one out of 100 different canonized Catholic saints of beer, he's still one of my favorites because he's so well renowned. It's still to this day, he's honored with all those festivities and everything, and he's just a really interesting character to think about. If you read through the context and the lines between his stories, he seems incredibly deep, despite the fact that some of that real human characteristics of him aren't always captured. The trauma of war and his desperate desire to be away from political nature and leadership, and everything about him just seems so human. And that's an aspect that a lot of people who, like me, are not religious often view as being missing from the whole religious experience. And it's just, when you tie that into the world of beer, he just becomes infinitely fascinating to me. So all I gotta say is, cheers to St. Arnold. He just seems like such a dang cool guy. So stay tuned. We're going to have a bunch more stories about various beer saints, because there's a lot of them, and there's some incredibly fascinating stories that come out of them. And I really want to be able to capture that because, as I mentioned earlier, religion and beer always fascinates me, especially when they're intertwined. So thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a little something about St. Arnold, about beer history, because that's the whole point of me doing this. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe. Remember, there is a story in every bottle, and that life is beautiful. Cheers.